Guys, welcome to a classic movie review of 1922's Nosferatu, starring Max Schreck and Gustav von Wangenheim. Now, this was directed by F.W. Murnau, and guys, this is, without question, one of the foundational pillars upon which horror movie history and movie history in general rests upon. Now, of course, an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, but with all the names altered to prevent legal action, which failed, by the way, and we'll discuss that. This film can't claim to have invented vampires or the Dracula story, but what it did do was produce a template that pretty much every other retelling of the story has followed since, from the Universal Bela Lugosi movies of the 30s right the way through to Francis Coppola's early 90s adaptation. Now, they all lift imagery and sometimes actual shots from this movie. Now, of course, at the time of this review, Robert Eggers' much anticipated remake is on the horizon, and it'll be fascinating to see how it differs coming 102 years after this original. Let's take a look. So before we start, a quick bit of history regarding Nosferatu. This is, of course, an adaptation of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. Now, Stoker's book sold fairly well in its time. He himself would die in 1912, quite a poor man, unaware of the legendary status his work would eventually achieve. But now from here in steps German director F.W. Murnau, planning to adapt Dracula into a movie. Unfortunately, Stoker's widow wasn't too happy about this and sued, refusing to allow the film to be made without her permission. So Murnau and the studio got around any legal action by altering the names of the characters. However, it's clearly obvious it's lifted from Stoker's work, so the court ordered the original film be destroyed. But thankfully, for film history, it would survive through second generation reels and eventually be reconstructed to the version that we see today. Now, that's whistle-stop stuff, of course, so what about the film itself? Well, it's a masterwork, basically, and if you've any kind of interest in film, film history, horror movie history, or the Dracula story, then it's essential viewing. If you've ever seen a vampire movie or a movie about Dracula, you'll be familiar with the plot here. An Eastern European count, Count Orlok here, is looking to buy a property, and a young estate agent travels up to his mountainside castle to close the deal. Now, upon finding his client is a feral-looking weirdo who thirsts for blood and sleeps in a coffin during the day, he gets freaked out, especially when he notices some bite marks on his neck, which he hilariously assumes are mosquito bites. Now, things take another turn for the worse when the Count sees a photo of the young man's wife and decides to focus his attention on her. Now, before long, he's packing himself up in a coffin and sailing off to his new home and hopefully his next victim. Now, Nosferatu is, of course, over 100 years old, and so you won't find any blood-soaked gore here, no smash-cut jump scares. But what survives here over a century later is an overall creeping sense of dread and some of the most haunting imagery still to be found on the silver screen. Now, of course, the centre of all of this is a performance from a German actor, Friedrich Gustav Maximilian Schreck, or Max Schreck, as he was known, in an early film role for him as Count Orlok. And now, as well as standing about 6'3", he sports impressive but not over-the-top makeup here, and the rest of his demonic demeanour is communicated through his stiff body language and rodent-like movements. I still love this kind of horrifying vampire look before Hollywood tried to make them sex symbols, although in fairness, Bram Stoker did describe Count Dracula as an aristocratic and gentle count. Here, though, Orlok is presented as a bringer of plague, a sickness that spreads across the land via the rats that he brings with him on his travels. Now, he's not a handsome smooth talker that seduces young maidens, but a master of suggestion and mind control. Now, Schreck admittedly doesn't have a massive amount of screen time here, but his presence is felt throughout the movie, and his imagery is iconic across a century of pop culture. Now, although much of Nosferatu was filmed on location, it's still one of the key works of German expressionism, which itself was one of the most recognisable and influential styles of silent cinema. Now, up there with 1920's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and 27's Metropolis, you'll frequently find this movie on those greatest examples of early expressionism in film lists. Nosferatu actually starts out in what feels like the open air, in locations that still stand today, incidentally, but as its 94-minute runtime elapses, its locations slowly begin to close in, whether it's damp jail cells, the crooked architecture of the town, things become more oppressive the closer Orlok gets to his prey. Now, personally, I always find it difficult to assess acting quality in silent cinema, as it's so far removed from what we are used to seeing today. Without the aid of dialogue and the subtlety of a more naturalistic performance style, we do get a more over-the-top physical acting style. Movements that exaggerate and facial expressions have to help sell the story. So Gustav von Wangenheim here as the young estate agent Hutter and Greta Schroeder as his ill-fated wife Ellen do admirable jobs, but my favourite performance comes from Alexander Granach as Knock. Now, Knock begins the film as Hutter's boss and sends him to Orlok's castle to make the sale, but by the end of the movie, he's Orlok's mad slave. This character, I think, standing in for Renfield in the Dracula tale, his wide-eyed, drooling madman, is excellent here. Now, much of Nosferatu's appeal, for me anyway, is the imagery and the general creepiness of the whole thing. There are shots in this film that have gone down in film history. Hutter opening the door of his room to find the Count waiting for him. Orlok rising from his slumber aboard the ill-fated ship, transporting him. And the subtle and motionless image of him gorging on the blood of Ellen, half drenched in shadow, is gore-free but still enough to raise the hairs on the back of your neck. So, of course, these days, Dracula and just vampires in general are a huge part of horror media. Stories of these undead bloodsuckers go back hundreds and hundreds of years. The first published story of them appearing as far back as 1819. And, as many a story does, it mirrors the time and attitudes that it was birthed in. Bram Stoker's Count Dracula was a scary figure of evil, but also a commentary on Victorian England's fears of mass disease, taboo sexuality and moral corruption. Now, Murnau's film has some uncomfortable similarities to the Spanish flu epidemic, images of streets full of coffins, and the spectre of death and imagery of rats bringing disease linked to the appalling trench warfare conditions in the First World War. Away from all that though, the vast majority of what we know as classic vampire lore was either invented here in this film or at least pinched from Stoker and shown on screen for the first time. Now, although this film is notable for introducing the mechanic of having a vampire die by exposure to sunlight, there are no stakes through the heart here, and no crucifixes, and no cloves of garlic to fend off Orlok. Go check it out.